how do we sort of appease our evolutionary biology while still being able to leverage the tools that modernity provides us? And that's sort of the question that I wanted to spend, I don't know how long, maybe my whole life trying to answer. It's quite a big question. And so I really had evolutionary biology. I had that lens through which I was viewing the world, and I just started, I guess, my own personal educational journey.
To the Decentralised Health Podcast and to episode number 16. Today's guest is Sam Soutar. Sam is a medical doctor who has decentralised himself from the conventional medical system, not wanting to take part in the pharmaceuticalisation of our community. As a health optimization practitioner, he brings a revitalizing approach to the space, steering clear of dogma and one-size-fits-all approaches. Sam draws wisdom from diverse fields, including functional medicine, evolutionary biology, quantum physics, and biohacking, and weaves them all together to achieve optimal health outcomes. He holds certifications in health optimization practice and metabolomics, empowering him to explore cutting-edge and personalized health strategies. Friends, welcome to the Decentralised Health Podcast and to Sam Soutar. Friends, welcome back to the Decentralised Health Podcast. And today we have a very, very dear friend of mine. We met at the Solar Culture Retreat in El Salvador, and I have been on his case since then, which was this November, December last year, to get him on this podcast. And we have finally aligned our calendar to make that happen. I'm very excited to introduce you to Dr. Sam Soutar. Sam, how are you, brother?
I'm very good, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. It's time that the world knew who you are. So please introduce yourself to the listeners and to the viewers. Start wherever you want to start your hero's health journey, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. My name is Dr. Sam Soete. I'm a medical doctor by training, but I actually decided to decentralize myself from the conventional medical system. I guess after 6 years of studying, I realized that all I knew how to do was prescribe medications, follow algorithms, depending on sort of whichever diagnostic label the patient had been given. But I knew very little about health and what it meant to be healthy and how we can sort of strive towards that positive outcome. And that's really where my curiosity was taking me. So I realized, the allopathic medical system was not very compatible with my way of thinking, and I wanted to do things differently. So now I work as a independent health consultant, working with people to optimize their health, but also sort of some more chronic and complex cases as well. It's been a great journey so far.
Amazing. And just so that the people at home can understand how important this is for you specifically, how old are you?
Yes, I am 27.
So, ladies and gentlemen, he's 27 years old and he's already spent 6 years in the allopathic medical system, only to then realize very, very early on in his career that wasn't the way to go. So the fact that you are now working with people and you are optimizing their health, describe in your words what health optimization is. And it can be as simple or as complicated as you'd like it to be.
Yeah, I guess the way I see it is sort of a modern term of salutogenesis. I know we want to dig into that topic a bit later on, but it's really stepping away from the pathogenesis paradigm, which is all focused on disease. Even prevention it falls within the pathogenesis paradigm. When I talk about health optimization, I'm really talking about moving towards something rather than trying to deflect, move away, or cure something that's happened to us. So it's a lot more proactive. Mm-hmm. It's about establishing these sort of foundations that lead to robust health outcomes and actually allows us to maybe bounce back from those inevitable illnesses that come.
Amazing. I love that. And we will touch on salutogenesis a little bit further down the line. So with health optimization, you realized very early on that the centralized system wasn't going to allow that to happen. And so you switched into that decentralized health system. And obviously, this being the Decentralized Health Podcast, a lot of the people that are listening have listened to episodes before, so they're going to understand that separation between the two. But for people that aren't that familiar with what is a centralized system and what is a decentralized health system, how would you describe that?
Yeah, I would say really decentralized health is a paradigm shift. And I don't like to say decentralized medicine because in my opinion, medicine by definition is somewhat centralized.
Mhm.
I like to say health instead. So instead of relying solely on centralized institutions such as hospitals, insurance systems, government bodies, sort of these public healthcare systems for direction, decision making, decentralized health really empowers individuals and communities to take ownership of their health, using whatever knowledge they have access to, using personalized data, distributed resources.
Mhm.
And I guess at its core, it recognizes that health doesn't really originate in the hospital or in a clinic, right? But in sort of daily life interactions, in our light environment, in our food, in our sleep, the way we move, in our relationships, and I guess somewhat more generally, it's found in our connection to nature. So
Mhm.
I guess by combining these modern tools, whatever tools you have available or are interested in, that's sort of what encompasses decentralized health. Then,
Amazing. That's a great answer. So going back to your journey, obviously being in that allopathic system to begin with, when did you first know that was where you wanted to go? You know, because it was quite young to get into that system and that way of thinking. So how old were you? What was the path for you
mm,
going into that?
yeah, I was actually really late. Um, Sort of triggering my interest in medicine. I loved biology. I loved understanding nature and how we relate to it. I wasn't necessarily thinking about medicine or becoming a doctor because no one in my family had done that before. And it was really just, I guess, a seed that a teacher had planted, saying that, oh, you get decent grades, you're interested in biology, you might as well apply for medicine. So I did, and that's how I got into it. First 3 years were amazing. I learned all about physiology, anatomy, even a lot of molecular biology as well, because I started off doing biomedical sciences, and and then we started moving away from that stuff and moving more towards hospital work, working with patients, which was really fun. But the way that we had to work with them was not really speaking to me.
Mm.
It became memorizing medications, their mechanism of action, all of their side effects, their contradictions. It became memorizing patterns, which is fun in general, but with the only goal being which diagnostic label do I put on this pattern, this presentation pattern? And then that triggers a protocol or an algorithm that then tells you which meds to prescribe in which order. And the moment we got to that sort of work, I realized that it's really not for me. I didn't enjoy it. So that was around the fourth year of medical school. So I still had 2 more years to go, and um, that was a struggle to sort of continue. But I really did want to finish it off. I thought that was important. But yeah, I realized I ended up writing a really long essay. That's actually how I came to that conclusion. So if anyone is ever struggling with sort of answering the big questions, I recommend creating a live document that you just sort of add on to. It could take months or years to finish, but you're just sort of picking up ideas here and there, little thoughts, adding them into this sort of coherent document. And that's sort of how I came to the decision to leave ultimately.
That's really quite a profound way to encapsulate your thought process as you're going through it, to then be able to, in that third person, look back at your kind of progression and your growth through all of that, so that you could then make what would then be a very well-rounded decision of, do I continue down this route or do I go somewhere different? So from that moment, you've written this essay to yourself and you've realized that's not the way you want to go. And obviously, decentralized health is relatively new. So the whole kind of quantum biology side of things, circadian biology side of things. I mean, I first heard about the circadian side of stuff from Satchin Panda's work when he was doing
Oh,
the circadian eating. And obviously everybody called it time restricted feeding, which it wasn't, it was circadian. But that was probably what, 2016, 2017. So I think that's when his book came out. So what was it? What was your first kind of
yeah.
exposure to that side of things?
Yeah, I guess at the end of my essay, I sort of ended with a question, which was, how do we sort of appease our evolutionary biology
Yeah.
while still being able to leverage the tools that modernity provides us? And that's sort of the question that I wanted to spend, I don't know how long, maybe my whole life trying to answer. It's quite a big question. And so I really had evolutionary biology. I had that lens through which I was viewing the world, and I just started, I guess, my own personal educational journey. Start off with evolution. Let's go back to the start of life. Very quickly, you get to mitochondria and the sort of burgeoning of multicellular life, and you start to understand how important energy is for life to take place. And so, yeah, mitochondria was sort of the first linchpin that
Yeah.
I realized was incredibly important when it came to salutogenesis, or figuring out how to be healthy. Taking care of these little endosymbionts became incredibly important. And then, yeah, you very quickly get to circadian biology or chronobiology and light as well.
So when did you first, because everybody goes through this kind of this pathway, when did you first stumble upon Dr. Jack Krus's work?
Um, I think it was the podcast, probably with Eric Hubert. Sorry,
Andrew
and
Huberman.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think that was the start, but I was already deep into mitochondrial biochemistry before then, so it was very interesting to see that novel perspective then.
Yeah. He's got a very, very different view of looking at things. And anybody that doesn't know who Dr. Jack Kruse is, just Google his name or just YouTube search him and you will find a plethora of information. He's not everybody's cup of tea, but the stuff that he talks about early on anyway is very, very interesting, and it will definitely change your outlook on certain things. So we've briefly touched upon salutogenesis and we briefly touched upon mitochondria. I would actually like to talk about salutogenesis first, because mitochondria is very deep and it can go in many different directions. So salutogenesis, for anybody that doesn't know what that is or hasn't ever even heard of that before, let's give them a base understanding and then we can go into a little bit more depth from there.
Yeah, sure. I guess we can sort of first focus on the sort of illness or allopathic medicine, and understanding how rife with Orwellian language it is, right? The healthcare system is not about health, it's about illness. It's activated when disease strikes, with the sole aim of sort of becoming unsick. The health checks, right? That's another word, but it's actually looking at symptoms of disease rather than indicators of health.
Yeah.
So this is sort of an unconscious bias towards preventing and addressing negative health after it's already occurred, rather than cultivating positive health in a very sort of doing it before it goes wrong. Essentially, proactive way is what I wanted to say. Um, so yeah, pathogenesis sort of assumes that when we take care of disease, when we take care of illness, health will magically take its place. But that's
Right.
just not the case, right? A good mentor of mine, Dr. Ted Achacoso, said, just because you're not sick, it doesn't mean that you're healthy. It just means that you're not sick. And
I like
so
that.
so yeah, like merely eradicating depression, it's not going to inherently generate compelling reasons to find meaning in life, right?
Yeah.
These are not the same thing. And so salutogenesis is really focused on bringing you from 0 to 1, whereas pathogenesis is focused on bringing you from negative, however, to 0, best case.
Okay. Amazing. So I've got this written down here because I wanted to be able to explain this to people, what salutogenesis is and how it's kind of coming from. So it was coined by Aaron Atanovsky, and is derived from the Latin salus, meaning health, and genus, origin. So that would be like the origin of health, basically. And it's asking that question rather than what makes people sick, as you say, what makes people healthy. And I like that approach because, as you say, just because you are curing, loosely word, curing a sickness doesn't mean you are healthy in any way, shape, or form. And your description of just because you're taking something that stops you feeling depressed doesn't mean that you're automatically going to start feeling happy, because it's not a replace this with that kind of scenario. So when we're looking at these key concepts of like this health continuum, so health, as it says here, is seen as a range from ease to dis-ease rather than a binary state. How do you apply this with your client base?
Yeah, so salutogenesis in that way is a lot simpler
Mhm.
because humans have a lot more in common than we think. And so when we figure out how we can be healthy, a lot of the answers will apply to most people. Then the complexity is about how to integrate that into this particular person's life, because everyone has different things going on, different stressors, different weaknesses or vulnerabilities or
Mhm.
limitations that they need to work around. And so that becomes a sort of unique problem solving activity there. Um, and once you lay those foundations, oftentimes you will find that a lot of the issues will start to disappear as you allow this sort of self-correcting, self-organizing system, which is the human body, to actually function properly and optimally with the right amount of energy. It can take a lot of these problems and solve it themselves. On top of that, you can then layer some more specific protocols or whatever you want to call it to address their specific issues, to give them some momentum to get their body, up and running again. But that's really how I like to view things.
Amazing. Okay, so I know of this theory, but I didn't know the depths of it. So I have taken some notes so that we can have some things that we can speak about here. So it talks
Absolutely.
here about something called generalized resistance resources, or GRRs. And it says here that these resources include internal factors like ego strength and external ones like social support that help individuals manage stress. So it's about, in that regard, utilizing not just what you find within, but the supportive structures you find outside of yourself, which is something which you mentioned right at the beginning about the difference between the centralized health and the decentralized health model. And you brought up something quite specific, which as yet, nobody has mentioned on this podcast, which is relationships.
Mm.
Nobody's mentioned the weighted importance of how relationships and the supportive structure and stability that they can provide you help shape your health outcomes. So from that generalized resistance resources kind of approach and that relationship side of things, how do you implement that into your world? And then how do you teach that to your clients as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important. And maybe I'm not the best at practicing it myself because I tend to be someone who's quite introverted, and I will prioritize very specific relationships, but I'm not necessarily someone who's out trying to get 300 friends every week, basically. Um, but it's the sort of the strength of those relationships that's very important. Having someone to lean on, that's just worth all the peptide protocols in the world, right?
Yep,
And so I did have this theory that one of the most profound mitochondrial stressors in our world today is loneliness.
I like that.
And I tried to find some literature on it. There's not that much, but yeah, our mitochondria respond to these things, and so
Mhm.
it's not too big of a stretch to think that these sort of relationships are actually affecting our bioenergetics as well.
No, I agree with you. And I was actually listening to a podcast the other day. I don't remember who it was that I was listening to. It might have been Joel Green. And he was saying about how mitochondria have this capacity. And he said, I think he said fission and fusion. I would have to listen to it again just to double check that. But he was saying they they're obviously always together. And in that biogenesis kind of moment, they're saying, all right, I'm missing this part, but you have that part in abundance. So I'm going to borrow that from you, but I've got all of this and you don't have any of that. So I'm going to give that to you. And that is that relationship bond from that mitochondrial level where they're helping each other survive, by sharing sharing what they have in abundance and asking to borrow what they don't have in abundance. And by doing that, they all stay together. And I think when he was saying this, I don't know why, but I pictured Mormons and people like that obviously they've got a massive community. The community is family as well as extended family, and they all help each other with their own unique set of skills. And again, like if you go back in the day before there was a whole kind of monetary system and there was just a barter system, if you were a bricklayer and I was a painter and I wanted a wall and you wanted a picture, well, we're going to be able to have a really nice working relationship because I'm going to paint you a picture and you're going to build me a wall. Nice and simple. You've got that skill in abundance. I've got my skill in abundance. And I think that is something which, and again, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine when I was in London the other day about how since pre-lockdown, community and social bonding was very, very good. And post lockdown, we have this massive increase of anxiety levels in people, a massive social distancing where people spend more time indoors alone than they do going out. Like if you go out now to pubs or to bars or wherever like that, they're not as busy like on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night as they used to be. Where if you looked at people's homes, not in a voyeuristic way, but if you looked at where people are spending most of their time, they've got so used to being in their very, very small, close-knit unit or on their own. Because I'm like you, I have that introvert, extrovert thing going on where I can spend a lot of time by myself and I'm absolutely fine with that. But that's because I'm very self-reliant. It's not because I don't want to see people. It's just because I'm like, well, I'm very good at what I do on my own. I'm very comfortable with my own self. So if people want to come round, great. If people ask me to go out, that's great. But I don't actively go out to seek, as you say, get 300 extra friends every weekend, because the people that I do have in my life, I have cherry picked those people because I add something to them and they add something to me. And I think this is a very, very important discussion because it's something which I've just noted in society, particularly Western society anyway, and linking that back to the Mormon and the mitochondria side of things, there is a massive void in this social connection now. And there are more single people now. There are more childless people now. And there's more people with anxiety now, social anxiety as well. And I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but obviously you're of a different age group to me. But when I go out and I listen and I see the younger generation, God, it makes me sound older, that younger generation, younger than your generation still, like early 20s, they don't seem to know how to communicate very well. They seem to lack that social bonding ability where they can't just chat breeze. They have nothing to say unless they're talking about themselves. You speak to them and they don't ask you about you. They tell you about them. So there's no give and take. You see what I mean?
Also becomes over reliant on sort of these social lubricants, the alcohol, the drugs, the loud music, where you're having a good time in the moment, but actually you're not forming any connections. You can't actually understand what they're saying. Rarely will you remember someone's name. So yeah, it's all this sort of superficial relationships that are being formed, which is a shame. And like you said, the lockdowns were, an example of the reductionism that takes place in centralized medicine or centralized systems in general, where there's no calculation being done of second and third order effects. Not that they can be done to an exact degree, because it's that's the nature of complex systems, but there wasn't even an attempt to figure out what might happen if we lock everyone in their homes. Sure, we might reduce the spread of something, but is that good for health overall? Probably not, right?
No, exactly. Because now they're saying that loneliness is the new smoking, right? When it comes to health outcomes, or particularly longevity from that perspective. And I think this is a very real problem, which not that many people are addressing, in the sense of that we need to bring back this capacity of social communities bonding again. Like I remember when I was younger, we would have street parties where neighbors would get their tables out and everybody, the whole road would be closed because we'd all be sat on a table. Or, I suppose in where you're coming from, and where are you right now? You're in Belgium, right?
I'm in Belgium, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd imagine you guys have a very similar thing where you have more of a community gathering of people where you all get together and you actually get to know your neighbors, where I'd imagine most people nowadays don't know their neighbors. They don't know their name. They don't know what they do, and they probably don't even care. And I think this is a very detrimental thing when it comes to, because when we look at health, everybody always thinks physical, and they forget that everything has a neurological drive. And we come from tribes. And I remember Dunbar's number was like 150, because
Mm,
that's the amount of people that would have been our tribe. So that's the amount of names or connections that we will normally keep, is 150. So that number right now is probably a lot less. I'd imagine it's probably 50 at max, not
mm,
150. And we're losing that capacity. And I think this was something that, and again, we spoke about this when we were in solar culture. We had 30, 40 people in one place in the middle of El Salvador, where none of us come from. We've all come from different parts of the world, but yet we were all there for the same reason. We all got on. There wasn't a single person whose energy didn't match another person's energy. We all had something to speak about. And it was just lovely to be in that kind of community. The energy was very tangible, very real. You know, like
yeah.
we met on the first day at, I think it was that Fisherman's Club, whatever it was, where I was
Yeah,
staying,
we were chucking the ball around.
and we were chucking the ball around and stuff. And then from that moment on, every day, my brain was just like on that hunt for you. Every morning when I'd go out, when we were doing sunrise, I'd come and find you,
Mm,
because we just had that instant connection. And it wasn't just you, we did that with a lot of people, but I just remember that instant connection. I was like, he's part of my tribe. He's got that same mindset. I'm not the N of one in my own life now, where I'm the odd one because nobody else thinks or acts like I do. We now
mm,
have that community thing. And I think this is so important for health. I just don't think people realize the detriment of isolation, or, as you say, utilizing recreational things to create this fake connection, because without it, you don't know how to behave, you don't know how to act. And I
mm.
think that's a very, very real thing, which not a lot of people are addressing.
And it's another issue with modern life where, we're bringing everything into this one very cramped, dense space, which we call a city, and everyone wants to live in them. They're all the hype, but in a city, you're anonymous.
Yep.
No one knows who you are. No one cares who you are. You walk past everyone without making eye contact. When you go to the countryside, it's like a wave of relief. Everyone is friendly, saying good morning, actually stopping to have a chat, and it's just a good time. And so it's just another example of how the sort of centralization of things really destroys the sort of emergent properties that we
Mm,
get when we interact with each other.
I agree. And this leads very nicely on to another part of the salutogenesis that we were talking about, which is something called sense of coherence. Now, obviously, we know coherence from the quantum biology side of things, but I think this is bringing it into that more ethereal energy space of central to salutogenesis. The sense of coherence is comprised of comprehensibility, so the understanding of life events, manageability, having coping resources, and meaningfulness, finding purpose. So a strong sense of coherence helps individuals utilize resources effectively, fostering resilience and better health. And I think that what we were talking about is lacking. This sense
Mm.
of coherence is lacking in modern society, because people just don't have that. One, they don't have that ability to intero kind of like that introspection, that ability to know who they are, spend time finding out who they are, because they don't give themselves that time. They never sat in stillness. They never sat just
Mm.
watching a lake kind of just ripple around. They're never just like what you were just doing recently on your holidays, just enjoying life and
Right.
spear fishing and chilling out and enjoying the sun. People
Yeah.
just can't spend that level of time on their own because they don't like being with themselves. And this is where something that Anthony de Mello said, that there is a difference between loneliness and being alone,
Mm.
where being alone is meaning that you are comfortable with your own space and you don't need other people to make you feel away. Where loneliness happens when you need other people to make you feel better about yourself. So this is when missing somebody can happen. Oh, I
Mm.
missed them because when they were here, I felt like this. Well, you can still miss somebody because of who they are rather than how they made you feel. And that is that then empowered version of being able to be alone. And I think that's something that you have in spades. So is this something that you teach to your clients as well, like how to be that slightly more coherent version of yourself?
I think ultimately it comes down to living a way that is coherent with how you feel and understand the world. Like so many people are doing things and saying things they don't agree with.
Hmm.
Um, and that really destroys coherence. That destroys your soul little by little. That's partly why I left the centralized system as well, is that I would constantly have to lie if I were to stay in it. Um, and that just, yeah, it eats away at you. Um, and and I guess with regards to the solitude aspect, I think there's I forgot who it was, but he said something along the lines of all of man's problems come from his inability to sit alone in a room.
Yep.
Um, and it's when you really get to that point of solitude, it takes a long time, right? It can take hours, it can take days. Often nature is the best way to find it, but I define it as the sort of absence of inputs.
Yep.
We always need to be walking around with music. We always need to be listening to a podcast. We can never just be doing something or just be doing nothing. And when you quiet down all those inputs, that's actually when your creative mind starts to speak, right? That's when you build things, develop things. That's when the output comes. Um, and that's a really exciting place to be, but not many people get there, unfortunately.
No, I agree with you. And I can't remember again the statistic directly. I think it was something like the brain filters out something like 73% of what's happening in our world at all times. And yet, in one day, we receive more distraction than what our ancestors would have done in a year. So
Mm,
one of our days worth of notifications and distractions and ping, 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 and all the noise and all the things that are going on, that equals 1 year in our ancestors' life just for
wow.
one day. And we feel overwhelmed with that. But yet 73% of the stuff that is actually happening, we don't know about because our brain filters it out, because otherwise it would be too much. It would be so overwhelming. We would be, it would be like analysis by paralysis, paralysis by analysis. We just wouldn't be able to move. We wouldn't know where to go. And I think Muji Mala said, like, you have to become the witness of what is going on around you. You have to sit upon the mountain top of your own being.
Mm,
And then to kind of capitalize on Rumi, where he says, like, when silence speaks, stillness listens. And unless you have that stillness, as you say, you cannot receive any of the creative downloads that are waiting for you, or any of the answers that are waiting for you.
mm,
Because whenever we're sending out these thoughts of why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't that happened? Well, we're always in that very driven, masculine, dominant, go, do, achieve mindset, which is very masculine polarity from the David Deida side of things. And that's the, as I say, the go and get, where that's the yang up to the yin, where the yin is the empty vessel, and that empty vessel is empty. That's its usefulness, is because it's empty.
mm,
And then you fill it. That's what makes it useful. But we can't receive anything if we're constantly moving. Somebody said it to me the other day. They're like, if your fists are always closed, you can never take anything. And I
mm.
was like, that's a really good way of looking at it. Like, if you're always running around like a full pelt, that tension, until you open your palms, you can't receive anything because you're always in that fight mode. So
It's like I forget the experiment exactly, but there's an animal, maybe it's a chimp. I think chimps are a bit smarter than this, but it's basically an animal driven by greed, let's say, and it's in a cage and it has to let go of a piece of food that's like on the other side of the barrier. It's holding on to it and has to let go to be able to escape the cage, but it doesn't. It just holds on and tries to pull it through constantly. And it'll do that until it's dead, right? Not understanding that it needs to let go in order to be able to go outside and get the piece of food. Um,
exactly.
so yeah, that's super interesting.
So yeah, so that holding on
Yeah.
is what's stopping you from moving forward, because the easiest thing to do would be just to let it go. I like
Mm,
that. That's very cool. That's very cool.
yeah. Something else you mentioned with this sort of all the stimuli coming in. I often get this where I can't deal with very loud spaces or where things are moving a lot. And so like a nightclub, that's my worst nightmare, right? And you can imagine a hospital is actually very similar.
Yep.
um, and so there's just too much happening and there's too much noise to the point where I can't actually understand what someone is saying to me.
Mhm.
Whereas someone with very bad hearing, one of my friends, he can actually have conversations. And so it's strange because his hearing is worse. And I think it's because my mind isn't necessarily filtering out all of this background noise.
Mm.
Maybe that's a bit of a, linkage to ADHD, which would be interesting. But if you put me in a natural environment, I will hear that bird from kilometers away, right? So it's not my hearing is bad. It's just it's tuned to a different environment.
Yeah.
I think to some degree we're all sort of tuned to an environment which is not the one we live in today.
No, I agree with you. And I think this is where a lot of monks would say peace doesn't come from sitting on a mountain and meditating. Peace comes from being in the middle of chaos and still maintaining your centeredness.
Mm,
That's what it comes down to. So you might be right. It just might be a little bit too much stimulation for your brain to handle that level of stim. And listen, I'm the same. If I'm in a really, really busy environment, for me to have clarity, I would need to be out of that environment. I can still stay centered and I can still stay peaceful and I can still stay calm because I'm used to being in and around London and all those other types of
no,
places which are like that. But if somebody said to me, is that your comfortable place? No, definitely not. I'd much rather be somewhere a little bit more chilled. And again, having this conversation with a friend of mine over the weekend, she very much loves the London lifestyle. She loves being in London because that's where she's at in her world, and it makes her job, her business, everything a lot more successful. I'm on the other end of the spectrum saying, well, I want to live in the middle of nowhere around farmland and natural bodies of water so I can go and grab my raw milk when I need to. And I can still get a train into London in an hour and a half if I need to, but I'm away from all the EMFs. I've got that nice, peaceful kind of surrounding all the time because my central nervous system has almost got to that point where it can't stabilize in the environment that I'm currently in because it's too much stimulation. I've been
mm,
here too long. And now that I'm aware of that, my body's just like pulling me saying, right, we need to go, we need to move. And this leads me to a point which I think, again, doesn't really get addressed a lot when it comes to health. Where everybody says, you can't get healthy in the same environment that makes you sick. And whenever people think about that, they think about, yes, their external environment, but it's also the internal environment. And obviously, from an epigenetic perspective, our environment externally is also affecting genetically our internal environment. And
mm.
therefore, again, it's not going to be a one-way street. It's going to happen in the opposite way as well. Our internal environment is also then going to be impacting our external environment. So I think this is another part of health, particularly from a decentralized perspective, that people don't talk about too much because we're trying to take all the supplements, all the peptides, all the biohacks to enable us to stay where we are, when ultimately, if you really wanted to, and it always comes down to choice, you could sell and you could move, or you could just take breaks like you do and go and travel a little bit and take yourself to these more remote places where you would find that peace a little bit easier than what you would in your current environment. And I know it's not easy for everybody. Like I know Dr. Jack Cruz says, oh, everybody should move to El Salvador. Well, that's not applicable to most people. But it's then about, well, how can we make our environment that we're in more balanced and more aligned with how our body wants to function? Because otherwise we're always going to be in that, I'm feeling really crap, oh, I feel normal. We never
Uh-huh.
get to that optimal place because everything that we're doing just keeps us at this baseline,
Yeah.
you know?
That's where I like to recommend, like an adventure day, basically. That's what I call it. Have at least one day where, because a lot of people are actually working 7 days a week,
Yeah.
especially if they work for themselves. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think you need at least one day where you're doing nothing other than exploring your curiosities, exploring the real world, where all of your senses are being activated coherently, right?
Yeah.
Um, they're all matching up, lining up. You get some adrenaline shots from something. Depends what you're doing, right? Maybe you're going skiing, maybe you're going cliff jumping, maybe going spearfishing, right? But you get such a variety of emotions and feelings throughout that, and it really brings you into the present moment. I think the present moment, like when you find it, that is when all your senses are coherently activated for your environment. Whereas now, I'm listening to you, I'm seeing you on a screen, kind of, but I'm not close to you. Like I can't touch you, for example. So that's like a, a decoherence that's taking place there in the
Yeah.
sense, and that's what the digital world does to us. Whereas when you're in the physical world, everything makes sense to our body.
Yeah. I like that. And it's true. And I think this is one of the, as much as it makes these things possible, it also then creates that separation again, that very unobvious to the people that aren't paying attention, but very obvious to the body, as you say, that decoherence where it's like, well, I know I'm speaking to somebody, but yet I can't physically interact with them. But yet I'm still getting those micro expressions from your face, which my body's reacting to, but it's just missing that tactile ability, you know? And I think that's something which, again, technology is great and we're in a modern society, so it allows us to do all these great things, but it also, I think it was Einstein that
A
said that,
replacement.
no, it's not
That's
a replacement, exactly. And I think Einstein said, like, when technology allows us to connect over vast distances, that's when we're going to find ourselves the most lonely. And I think that's very true with what's happening. I really do. So, coherence, salutogenesis. Let's
yes.
now dive into an area which I know, obviously, from following you on X for quite some time before I actually met you, this is an area which I know you're very, very involved in, the mitochondrial side of things. So, again, for people that aren't aware that mitochondria are more than just the powerhouse of the cell, what are they? Why do we have them? And what do they do?
Yeah, I mean, uh, we can go all the way back basically, and go into detail, but I think there's some books which do that a lot better. Essentially, they are the evolutionary step that allowed multicellular life to take place. It allows us to utilize oxygen in such an efficient manner to produce ATP and a bunch of other things, such as heat and metabolic water. Um, but essentially, the way I see it is they're an orchestra, they're a colony, that regulate our cellular physiology based on the inputs that they detect. So they're like micro antenna that are constantly surveying the world, internally in the cell, as well as getting inputs from outside and trying to coordinate our bioenergetics, our metabolism based on what is understanding.
Mm-hmm. So they're anticipatory in nature then.
Yeah, exactly. And they act as sensors, for chemical, physical, microbial cues. And the more inputs you can give it, the more coherent that those inputs are, the more effective that its responses are going to be. Like a good example is, if you remember when you first started riding a bike, the the movements are really jerky, right, on the handle. It's like, oh, like going left too much, going right too much, and then you fall over. And that's because the body isn't able to proprioceptively sort of understand what's going on quick enough. The inputs are not coming in quickly enough. It's not used to it. Whereas someone who knows how to ride a bike, they can understand everything that's going around. They can move smoothly. They can coordinate their body smoothly. And that's sort of a fractal for what's happening in our cells with the mitochondria.
So, from a health perspective, how important are they?
Um, well, I guess, I think it was Doug Wallace said that life is energy plus structure plus information. And they sort of interpret the information, they regulate structure, and they produce energy. So they're sort of fundamental to the sort of complex life, in my opinion. And without energy, sort of the difference between being alive and being dead, right?
Yeah.
All the components are still there, all the biochemistry is still there, but it's lacking that flux, it's lacking that energy. And that's what the mitochondria take care of. So depending on where they're malfunctioning, what their heteroplasmy rate is, if it's in the heart or if it's rising in the liver, you're going to get issues come up there. These are the chronic diseases that our
Mhm,
society is plagued with. That's essentially mitochondrial dysfunction.
mhm. So, for people that don't know what mitochondrial heteroplasmy is, what is that?
Yeah, so mitochondria have DNA. The mitochondrial DNA, centralized medicine likes to focus solely on the nuclear DNA. And these mitochondrial DNA have different forms, right? They have different haplotypes. And heteroplasmy is essentially when these DNA mutate. Um, that's heteroplasmy. When there's a divergence from homoplasmy is when all the mitochondrial colony have the same DNA. That's homoplasmy. Heteroplasmy is when that diverges. Now, that can be positive. There can be a mutation that enhances a certain function, which is beneficial, but usually it tends to be negative in this sort of connotation. So heteroplasmy is the increase in mitochondrial DNA mutations that lead to a decrease in energy production. When that reaches a certain threshold, we start to get symptoms, we start to get issues, and that's when we go to the doctor. But it's the process started long before that.
Yeah, yeah. And we also have something else which is quite special about the mitochondria is the fact that it all comes from our mothers, doesn't it?
Mm, yeah,
So your mitochondria comes from your mum, hers comes from her mum, and so on and so on. And what is that called for people that don't know?
the sort of maternal inheritance.
Yeah. That's is that the haplotype?
So yeah, the haplotypes are just these different groups of mitochondria.
Yeah. Oh, so that would be the separation
Sort of
between
be
like
traced,
like a
back.
northern hemisphere to a southern hemisphere haplotype.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they'll have different genetics to them, different key features that allow them to thrive in their particular regions.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is actually something that I want to touch upon with you because again, I've not spoken about this on the podcast yet. So
Wow.
somebody that has that more southern hemisphere haplotype and somebody that has the more northern haplotype, what are the differences between the two?
Yeah, so I did do a lot of research into this, and I realized that a lot of it is more. I didn't find as many concrete answers as I thought I would. Um, so if we just sort of go back at haplotypes and how their relevance is sort of to figure out your lineage, right? So figure out migratory patterns where you came from. We sort of started in Africa with a L0, sort of migrated through Europe, migrated across Asia, and then to the Americas as well. Um, the theory is that haplotypes in the northern hemispheres are going to be a lot more uncoupled, and we can go into what that means. Whereas haplotypes, in Africa, for example, are closer to the equator, are going to be a bit more coupled
Okay.
in comparison.
So what's the difference between an uncoupled mitochondria and a coupled mitochondria then?
Yeah. So in order, it might be useful for the listeners sort of get a diagram up of the electron transport chain to understand this. But essentially, coupled means you're coupling the flow of electrons through the electron transport chain with the creation of ATP. So you create basically a big gradient of protons within the membrane. That's done with the flow of electrons, and then those protons get shuttled through the ATPase, which spins, and that's how you create ATP. So that's a coupled system. But you can also uncouple it by these uncoupling proteins, which can get activated through different reasons. But that basically allows the protons to flow through without going through the ATPase. So you're losing that gradient, you're losing that electrochemical potential without creating ATP. And so that gets released as heat. Heat is quite useful in northern hemispheres. That's
Yeah.
why you'd be a bit more uncoupled in the northern hemisphere. You'd be able to tolerate cold a lot better.
Yeah. So this would be why some of the northern haplotype, as you say, can handle the cold, and some that's got a more southern haplotype would find the northern areas quite difficult to generate any heat because they don't have that uncoupled ability.
Exactly. Yeah.
So would that make sense then that if somebody from a northern hemisphere goes to a southern hemisphere, that their system could adapt then and be a little bit more efficient in a warmer environment?
Yeah, so the way that I understand it, and again, I'm not sure this is based on the literature, but um, there is a degree of adaptation that can take place if you spend a long amount of time in a certain area. But depending on your haplotype, that adaptation is limited, right? I might never be able to get completely coupled as someone from Africa would, for example. But there was a cool example where, because I grew up in Asia, so I grew up in Singapore and Indonesia in very hot climates. And my cousin from Belgium came to play tennis. Well, he came over and we played tennis. And after 10 minutes, this is like almost a professional athlete. After 10 minutes, he was done. He was overheating. He had to stop and sit in the shade, basically.
Wow.
And so that was a clear example of his body not being adapted to that particular environment. But yeah, I think there is a degree of adaptation that can take place.
Wow, that's fascinating. And something else which fascinates me about the mitochondria is about how they can produce their own light. So is
Mm.
that something which you could help explain to the listeners and the viewers as well as to how our mitochondria produce this?
Yeah, these are, I guess, you're referring to biophoton emission.
Yeah.
Um, I may not be the best person to explain this. I'm very much learning still. But essentially, the production of reactive oxygen species by the mitochondria can trigger the release of biophoton emissions, which are really not powerful at all. They're really weak, but they're coherent and potent signals that the cell does pick up on, and it's a form of communication. It communicates with the nuclear DNA. It tells it sort of epigenetic signaling can be important there. So it's very fascinating. There's a good book here, so you can tell I'm still learning. But this one here, I
Light
don't know if
shaping life.
yeah. This is a book that basically goes into depth on it. So anyone that's interested should pick one up.
Perfect. Okay. And that's a really nice segue now into another question. And I'm glad you wanted to cover this topic because this was something that you spoke about in your talk in El Salvador, which is light for health. And I found your talk fascinating. So start wherever you'd like to start with this. I don't have a specific question I want to ask you. I just find this topic absolutely fascinating. So light for health, explain this to people.
Yeah, I guess I view the lack of health it's typically due to environmental mismatches, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of ones that get covered, very often, which is food mismatches, sleep. But light is one that doesn't necessarily get focused on, and definitely not in the sort of general public. But it's one of those mismatches which really does affect every part of our physiology. Um, Maybe the easiest way to explain it is just to go from like, we don't necessarily realize how different our light environment has become. Um, Even in terms of brightness, me sitting indoors has about 100 times difference in brightness compared to being outside, right? And now we spend over 90% of our time indoors. And so that really is a profound change that we need to take into account.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess a light represents our biophysical environment. And the moment you understand that our biophysical environment really controls our internal biochemistry, it really puts a big spin onto how we understand what's going on in the body, how we're regulating neurotransmitters, our hormones. All of these things really are intricately related to the light signals that our body is receiving.
Mm. So for people that want to start applying some light health benefits or light for health benefits, where would you get them to begin?
It's actually very simple. Basically, think about the light environment that is happening in real life, in real time, outside, under the sun. That is the light environment that our body has evolved and tuned itself to across millennia. So you want to recreate that environment as much as possible. So the easiest step is go outside whenever you can, as much as possible. Um, and if it's too strong, then go in the shade, but at least you're still outside. That's, I think, the easiest step.
Mhm.
And then another step is to try to reduce the harms of modern lighting systems. The most common one would be artificial blue light that our body is receiving at times of the day that is not appropriate. So that would be in the early morning before sunrise, and that would be in the evening after sunset when it's dark. You don't want to be getting that blue light, which is going to reduce the melatonin production.
Yep. So see the sunrise definitely before you start staring at your phone. And when it comes to these artificial lights that we've got around us, like from our phone, from our laptop, from overhead lights and stuff like that, like what is, other than the reduction of the production of melatonin, because obviously we need to go outside to get all of that from that subcellular perspective, what are the other health implications for constantly being staring at our phone or constantly at the laptop and not blocking this off? Like what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, melatonin production, people tend to think of it as just affecting sleep. Melatonin is one of the most potent antioxidants in the body. It repairs DNA. It basically regenerates our body at night. And we get a lot of melatonin production in the cells as well, through infrared during the day. But that melatonin surge at night is incredibly important. And so when we get rid of that, that predisposes us to illness. There's a lot of research showing its connection between PCOS, metabolic disease, diabetes. Blue light's going to spike cortisol, it'll spike your blood sugar. All of these things are downstream of that artificial blue light. I think there's even studies connecting sort of breast cancer with shift work. So
Yep.
you really start to see how melatonin is like the master regulator, and everything downstream of that is going to be affected. That's how complex systems work. So nothing is free of the sort of harms of artificial blue light.
Yeah, and I'm already hearing people from the first thing that we were discussing about going outside that are like, oh, but in the Northern Hemisphere, in the UK, there's never any sun, it's always cloudy. Well, what you do?
I mean, the people underestimate the level of brightness that is happening outside, even when it's cloudy. You're still getting a bunch of infrared light, which is crucial. Um, Depending on your skin type, you might need to do something about that. I think the biggest issue is that in the winter, people are going to work. When they leave work, when they leave their home, it's dark.
Yep.
The sun hasn't risen yet. When they come back, it's dark.
Yep.
And so it's not necessarily the winter that is the issue. It's just their schedules don't line up. They don't sync with the natural sort of sunrise and sunset. So I think if you can get outside during the winter, you're probably fine. You can, supplement with lighting devices, red light therapy, which is fantastic. UVB lights as well. Maybe that's more for people with darker skin, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Because there was somebody talking the other day about how you should get in the winter in the UK, how you should get one of those reptilian bulbs and put it
Mm.
into like a standing lamp. So that within you've got UVA and UVB and all this stuff. And I was like, well, that's a little bit again of a circadian mismatch, because in the winter in the UK or anywhere in the northern hemisphere, you're not going to get UVB. It's just not going to be there.
Mhm.
So you're now interacting with that vitamin D melatonin pathway crossover, where melatonin is supposed to be taking the place of vitamin D from that immune receptor perspective in the winter. You don't want UVB unless you are in the southern hemisphere. That's different. Or if you've got that skin type where you need to have it, then yes, do that. But if you're white boy, I shouldn't be getting UVB in the middle of winter, because my body's going to be like, well, where are you getting it from?
Yeah.
So again, we've
And
got
then
that circadian
you
mismatch.
can do a bunch of hiking. You can go a high latitude,
Yep.
expose yourself to the sun. It can get really hot, if it's a sunny day in the winter even. So there's plenty of ways to sort of just hack that system.
Mm.
It's difficult to know whether adding in that extra artificial UV light, for example, is going to be net positive or net negative. I think it depends on your state of health. If
Yep.
you're trying to recover, then you might want some of the photo products that light is giving you, and so you can use it as a therapeutic tool. But in terms of just long-term health optimization, you might not need it.
Yeah, exactly. And I had this conversation with a client the other day. I said to him, like, you can get UVA bulbs. I was like, you can put them in your room, and you can get some UVA. I said you can get incandescent bulbs, which have got more of that natural light spectrum. And he was like, oh, I'll get all of those. So then I have to worry about going outside. I'm like, no,
No.
no, that's not what it's for. It's
Yeah.
not to replace, because you can't put daylight in a bulb. It doesn't work that way. You
Mhm.
still need to go outside, but you are just mitigating the damage from artificial LEDs by having something which is more circadianly light frequency favored than anything else. If you get a UVA bulb, that's basically a black light. You're not going to see anything from a black light unless your room is dark, and then it's going
Mhm.
to make it glow up like a 1980s disco. It's not really going to be very helpful, but at least it's on in the background. So if you had like a red light panel with the infrared light on, and then you had an incandescent bulb, because that's what I've got up here right now. If you've got
Mhm.
an incandescent bulb and an infrared light panel on, you're now getting a very more natural daytime kind of
Yeah.
balance of light, because you're getting the infrared from the panel, and you're getting the light spectrum from there. But then again, the lux, the brightness isn't there. So
Mhm.
ideally, you now want to have a big window with the window open to let that light in, so that you're
Exactly.
getting a little
Yeah.
more of that lux. So it's just about pairing these things.
Yeah.
But there's something that I wanted to add just quickly, because it's something which I was thinking about where you're talking about this, about the Northern Hemisphere. How much do you feel that light, the signal of light plus temperature makes a difference. So obviously, if we're indoors and we've got the heating on, and let's say we've got our incandescent bulbs, we've got our infrared light panel, but
Mm.
yeah, I've got my heating on cranking out at 75 degrees, which is a good like 30 degrees warmer than what it is outside. Do we now have another mismatch from a thermogenic perspective, do you think?
I think so. Heat or temperature tends to be more of a circannual rhythm rather than a circadian rhythm. Obviously, there are temperature difference day and night, but the extremes tend to happen between the summer and the winter. And I think those definitely are coordinating our physiology, especially the immune system. I think is definitely changing based on the seasons. And so, without those inputs from the seasons, you might have a summer immune system when it's actually winter, and then you might be getting colds all the time. So it's sort of it all plays into it.
So would you be an advocate for having more cold therapy in the summer, and sorry, in the winter than you would in the summer?
Yeah, for sure. I think uh, in the summer, cold therapy might just be going in the ocean, right? For me, when I was spearfishing in Malta, actually there were some currents due to winds, and it became quite cold where I was actually shivering in Malta in the summer, um, after like 30-40 minutes of swimming in the sea. So I didn't need like a cold plunge in order to get that signal.
Yeah.
Obviously, the temperature is a lot different to what it would be in the winter. Um, so yeah, it is interesting to think about.
Definitely, definitely. Right, Sam, we have taken up a lot of your time already, and I would love you to let people know, where can they find you? How can they work with you? Where are you most active so they can follow your stuff and kind of whatever it is that you're researching at that time, they can start learning about it, or where's the best place to go?
Yes. So I'm most active on X or Twitter. I think I'm at Sam_Suta. And then you can also find me on my website, samsuta.com. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat.
Amazing. Are you taking clients on at the moment?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Sam Soutar. It's been an absolutely amazing podcast. So I hope that you were paying attention and took some notes. And please reach out to Sam if you have any questions about what we've spoken about. Put the comments below as well. All of his links are going to be in the description box below too. Like, share, subscribe, do all that beautiful stuff. And until next time, stay blessed and stay well.